Lionel Shriver, you have just been to Byron Bay. You vowed you would never come back to Australia 3 years ago. What brought you back?
Well, I'm obviously changeable, as women used to be able to be all the time. So, it wasn't a hard and fast vow not to come back.
Excellent. So you've been at the Centre for Independent Studies Concilium up in Byron Bay, speaking about that. Terrific. It's very good of them to bring you out here. Last time you came out was the Brisbane Writers' Festival, which gained notoriety for you and also for Yasmin Abdel-Magid, who stormed out on you.
Yes.
Yes, but you'll be delighted to know she didn't only storm out of your lecture, she stormed out of Australia because she got so much...
Yeah, but she followed me.
Oh, she follows you around.
She's now in London.
Well, she's hoping for more of it to rub off of all that notoriety. Now, that instance, you were rightly speaking about fiction and the need for fiction writers to be able to basically put
write whatever they want.
Exactly.
Which has become an extreme position.
And how did it become an extreme position?
Well, I'm not entirely sure where it first cropped up, but there was this notion that originally was making people hysterical in the fashion industry of all places, when a white model wanted to wear dreadlocks, or some designer had a kimono type theme, yeah. And it was called cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
And back in 2016, when I gave the speech in Brisbane, this was not a household word, and I had to explain what it was in the speech. It had been applied to fiction very little, and it was difficult for me to find any examples to fill out the speech. And my biggest worry about that lecture was that I would bore the pants off the audience. I'm always worried about that. Because what I was saying was so self-evident, which is, I mean, this taboo against stealing from other cultures without permission, I don't know how you're supposed to get it, is a complete nightmare for a fiction writer. Fiction writers are thieves by their very nature, you know. We steal from everywhere, and it's one of those nice kinds of stealing that you get to keep what we took.
Exactly.
So it's like the perfect life, right? But, you know, fiction writers have to be able to speak with different voices and from different points of view. And if we're not going to have books that exercise a kind of effective apartheid, then and we're going to reflect Western life as it is currently conducted, then we need to be able to have as we now call it, a diverse cast. And this cultural appropriation taboo puts especially white writers in an untenable position. We're not supposed to, you know, borrow a couple of sugar without asking, but on the other hand, that means that we have all white casts, and you can't win.
So you've said that something called AAVE, which is African American Vernacular or something or other.
English.
English, okay. So you can't, now publishers will not let you write in some kind of patois unless you're of that so-called culture.
Well, I think we should be fair to publishers. This has been a big issue, especially in young adult fiction, but I have yet to be told by my publisher that I cannot write in AAVE. And my new book does have some small touches of what I would call black English. And my publisher has not told me that I have to get rid of it.
Right, good. So let's take a step back. You've written some terrific books, best-selling author. We Need to Talk About Kevin is obviously the most famous one, great movie with Tilda Swinton. We Need to Talk About Kevin got a lot of free publicity here for a couple of years when our Prime Minister was called Kevin. And every
headline was We Need to Talk About Kevin. Yeah.
Exactly. So people were surprised when they saw the film. Fantastic film, great book. You've also written The Mandibles. You've also written Big Brother, a very personal story about your elder brother who was obese. Now, all these, particularly The Mandibles, which has a big wall, which is a brilliant idea, where it is the Mexicans who put the wall up to stop America, which is, in your novel, collapsed, Americans pouring into Mexico. And you claim Donald Trump stole your idea.
Yes, he did, because I wrote that before he started running for president.
He thought, what a great idea, I'll build a wall.
Actually, I'm very impressed. It means that Donald Trump has actually read a book.
Absolutely, and it's one of yours. Now, but at what point, what is fiction? So what is creative fiction?
Well, you stopped me in my tracks. I'm not sure I've ever asked myself that question exactly. I think it's up to the fiction writer what fiction is, what it's for. I think that's what I'm trying to preserve for everyone, is the right to shape the medium to your whim. It is a form ultimately without limits, which people are now trying to impose limits on. A lot of my books do have a topical element. You know, yes, I have taken on obesity and the mandibles. I look at the collapse of the dollar in the United States. It's actually all about economics. In the book I'm going to release in this coming spring, it's about the cult of exercise.
Right.
So,
right.
you know, so I tend to hit a number of cultural obsessions. That's not a requirement of the form. It just happens to be what interests me.
Yeah.
And I think fiction is capable of taking on some of these difficult subjects with a lot more nuance, if only by containing contradictions, which nonfiction has understandably a bigger problem with, and coming at issues from many different angles and points of view so that you get more dimension. And frankly, I mean, maybe it's just me, but I find fiction a lot more fun to read.
Exactly. And is this the problem? Are the left so scared of you? Because the reality is the left have become very scared of you. You write columns in The Spectator on many different topics.
Well, that may be flattering me. They sure don't act scared of me.
Well, are they scared of your talent? And is this why the limiting of your, the pressure against you, oh, you can't write about this, you can't write about this, is because they're scared of your talent?
I think part of the problem is that the literary community, and I use that expression with scare quotes.
Exactly. I agree with you.
The literary community has become strangely homogeneous in its ideological makeup. And therefore I am something of an outlier. And I find this dismaying because time was that people who were attracted to writing, and especially literary writing, tended to be mavericks. They were people who didn't fit in with ordinary life. They were often misfits. They were often rebellious, you know. And now the current crop of fiction writers seems strangely obedient, conformist, and groupthink oriented. And I'm not like that. I'm more like this throwback kind of fiction writer. I don't like being told what to do.
Good.
And I would like to encourage my colleagues to loosen up and stop necessarily writing and speaking to script. Because it's boring, it makes for flat art, and I think we need more of a multiplicity of voices. I think because there are so few occasionally conservative, because my views are all over the map, I think they're consistent, but they're not perfectly conservative. We need more voices like that, and because they're so few, nobody out there that I know of is calling themselves a libertarian, then I get maybe disproportionate attention. I mean, in some ways I benefit from it.
Absolutely, but is this war by, well, let's call them the left, or the hard left, whatever you like, on literature, it hasn't stopped there. It's on creativity in general. You've written about, for example, the murals at the university in San Francisco. Beautiful set of murals.
Beautiful. Have you seen them online?
I've seen them since reading your article in The
They're
Spectator.
beautiful, aren't they?
Absolutely
It's not just my opinion.
Fabulous.
It's really great art.
It's great art, and these amazing murals tell the story of George Washington, warts and all, slaves, there are dead Indians, there's all sorts of stuff. So it's a warts and all thing. It's not a glowing portrait. Yet the left in San Francisco the left they wanted to...
They initially wanted to paint it over,
right,
which would destroy them forever. And then there was enough of a backlash, ironically, often from a lot of famous black people who said, you know, this is outrageous, this is fine art. And it, moreover, tells a very politically nuanced story about George Washington, which is, as you noted, quite critical. He was a slave owner, and he could be seen to have been complicit with the Native American genocide.
And they wanted to ban it because he was in it? Is this like here in Australia?
It had to do with certain images which have a starkness to them, which makes some people uncomfortable. There are these frontiersmen that Washington is directing to go forth, you know, kind of go west, young man. But they're painted all in gray. It's kind of this grim phalanx of people, and at their feet is this sepulchral dead Indian. And this is a shocking image.
So this is triggering. So they want to ban it because people might be upset by it.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is one of the most extreme examples of the left eating its own tail that I know of, because the mural was painted by a committed communist, and it was the fruit of FDR's Works Progress Administration, which was also, you know, very left-wing. The new part of the New Deal was, in some ways, the beginning of the current incarnation of the American left. So it's all on their side. They're destroying their own art. It's not some kind of right-wing, Nazi mural. They're destroying art that supports their own point of view, and that I actually just find that befuddling.
It's scary as well, though, isn't it? Because once we start silencing the artists, we're silencing artists, we're silencing writers. We were talking earlier about the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, where they're silencing comedians. We see that a lot around Australia. In fact, comedian used to mean someone who was funny. It doesn't mean that anymore. No, it means someone who just spouts leftist rubbish. At what point do artists fight back? And are you the figurehead to lead that fight? Because it seems to have landed in your lap.
Well, this is not a role that I have gone seeking. It's more a matter of, everyone raise your hand who wants to preserve freedom of speech and freedom of artistic expression, and I raise my hand and I look around me and nobody else is done it.
Everyone's looking at their iPhones, going, oh, sorry.
And this is a matter of self-interest to me. I mean, I'm trying to preserve the what I need to pursue my occupation, and what all of my colleagues need, and that's why I find it so perplexing that I don't get more support from fellow writers, even writers who may not share exactly my political beliefs. But freedom of speech, it belongs to everybody, and it isn't a right or a left-wing issue. And both the left has allowed itself to relinquish the importance of freedom of speech. They embrace an idea of freedom of speech, which means that all it is permission to speak atrocities.
Right.
Permission to be bigoted in public.
Yes.
Right. So we need to be able to control that. But that's not all it is, and the left has allowed the right to claim ownership of freedom of speech, and that's not good for anybody. It's because this is something that it doesn't have to do with political polarization. We both need freedom of speech. Now, it's true that the price of allowing everyone to say what they want is that you have to let people say things that you disagree with, maybe violently disagree with. I mean, not just, blue isn't my favorite color, but say things that maybe to your ear are bigoted, or to the right-wing ear are communist, right? But I would say that on both sides, the answer to resolving some of these big questions is not shutting everyone up, but letting everyone have a turn and to speak. I mean, I'm just, it's very, I guess it's very old-fashioned, but that's what I grew up with.
Exactly, and yet that is the war. The left have got a war against that freedom of expression and freedom of conscience in many ways. Now, I want to ask you specifically about your books. Let's start with, we need to talk about Kevin. So in that book, you went inside the mind of a mass killer, a mass shooter. We hear about these as another one that seem to be happening all the time. So as a fiction writer, you went into the mind and an extraordinary story. How did you approach that?
Well, funnily enough, I did so by not getting into that boy's mind. That is, at no point in the book is it told from the perspective
that's right.
of the killer. It's told from the perspective of his mother.
Yeah.
So you...
And her reaction to his deeds.
In fact, there's a kind of black hole at the center of that book. He's something of a mystery. And it's actually more interesting to get at that character from the outside. And because the truth is that we're often living with strangers in our midst, and these people who do suddenly explode for no reason are mysteries, and it is very difficult to get inside their heads, and we don't. So I was just expressing the nature of reality. We look at these people, we can come up with all these theories, but we're not them, and we don't quite understand how they got there.
Yeah, and you drop little clues, the toilet drain in the eye and so on, the things that he may have done along the way.
Well, I did try to get at a personality type that I think is pretty consistent from atrocity to atrocity, and that is this strange combination of low self-esteem and grandiosity. And also an envy. An envy, a sense of being left out, resentment. I sense that in a lot of these terrorist stories. Just somebody who is resentful of. It's as if everyone else is having a wonderful time. Right.
And the pain of the mother who still loves him at the end, or does she still love him, who has to figure out what went wrong, is every parent's nightmare with a child. It's every parent. Are we doing the right thing? Should we not have shown him that violent movie? Should we not have shown her this? Should we have done this? That's every parent's nightmare. Yeah,
and also this experience that we have when we read the newspaper and read about these killers. Parents have the same relationship often to teenagers. Parents don't know what's going on in the heads of their kids. You know, especially once kids become teenagers, they clam up. And they could be thinking anything. So, you know, we have a rosy version of parenthood, you know, this chummy, full knowledge. You watch them grow up. They are a part of you. They become total strangers. And you have to just have faith that what's going on behind those eyes is okay. So it's actually a novel that's very sympathetic with parents.
Yes, true. Now, Big Brother, you had an elder brother who was obese. He died. Tell us, was that painful to write? And you also got in trouble from the left again because you were you even though you had an obese brother, you weren't allowed to talk about obesity. What happened there?
Well, it's a novel that I hope is very sympathetic with people who have weight problems, and because I saw close up with my own brother how poorly he was treated by others, and how once he became very fat, that's all that people could see about him. Whereas, actually, he tested as a genius, right? Which I really resented when I was a kid. And later ended up being very proud of. And
So what did he do as well?
He was a sound engineer.
Right.
Self-taught. He quit school at 14. Yeah. So, you know, I really looked up to him, and it pained me enormously when he also became somewhat disabled because he had some bad accidents, and so you know how it snowballs. He couldn't be very active, and you turn to food sometimes when you need some kind of resort. And so I wrote the novel from a position of real sympathy.
But you were attacked.
The problem is that we are now in this culture where, you know, everyone begins a sentence, as a female American, I wasn't personally overweight. And I think that made, especially the activists who are trying to make being overweight just fine. And you know, I certainly don't support a social stigma, but they were very suspicious of a book that was actually on their side.
Again, it's the same as the murals.
Exactly.
The same, the left eating itself.
It's a novel that has whole long passages talking about what absurd assumptions we make about people based on how much they weigh, which is, I mean, it sounds even on the face of it utterly silly, but we do, you know. So we see someone who's overweight and then we attach all these qualities: laziness, sloth, lack of discipline, indulgence, and actually, people I've known who have battled with weight problems often exercise enormous amounts of discipline in trying to lose depressingly tiny amounts of weight. I mean, it's not fair at all. And then you get really skinny people and you associate them with primness, joylessness, judgmentalism because they think they're better than you, and standoffishness, and an inability to take pleasure in life because all they think about is not eating, whereas the fat people only think about eating.
Was it a painful book to write, or was
it was a very painful book to write. I have to say that one book I enjoyed writing less than any other I've written. There's a certain critical point in it. I started wondering, you know, do I really enjoy my profession anymore? Am I starting to lose that whatever really drove me to do it in the first place? And
what did drive you to writing in the first place, Lionel? Because you had 7 or 8 books before the first one was published.
I love storytelling.
Yes.
And I enjoy words. I like the thrill of creating something from nothing. It's pretty amazing what you can do with just print.
Blank paper.
But as for Big Brother, I found it almost hilarious when I took a step back after I published it. And it's like, it's about the fact that your older brother died. Big surprise you didn't have a fun time.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, you mentioned words and the love of words. You've also, we have on our show on Outsiders a segment called Hyperbole, which is how our former Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, pronounced hyperbole. She used to talk about hyperbole this and hyperbole that.
Sounds like a great sport.
Exactly. So you've written about hyperbole and how this has destroyed the language. So-and-so is a fascist, a racist, a sexist. We get accused of this endlessly on our show. You're this, you're that. These extreme words which can't possibly, cease to have meaning because they're used so extremely. So on the one hand, the left are destroying the language through...
They're destroying the very language that they rely on, right? So, I mean, best example is obviously racist. The first time I heard that anyone had called me a racist, I was really taken aback, insulted, and a little anxious, and like, where did this come from? My father was involved in the civil rights movement. It's like, how did I land here? You know, merely about a year later, water off a duck's back. Of course I'm a racist. Everybody's a racist. The word didn't work anymore. And that's why we moved so rapidly to white supremacist, because that, of course, is a much more extreme word. It used to mean something. It used to apply to a very small fringe element, mostly in the United States. It's been there forever. And the test of whether you were a white supremacist would be, you accuse them of being a white supremacist, and they say, "You betcha."
No.
Right? They're proud of it.
Yes.
Okay, now it just means anybody who isn't on the hard left.
Yes.
Yeah. Lots of Democrats are white supremacists. Everyone's a white supremacist now.
So,
in fact, they ran through that term in short order. It's meaningless now.
And sexist, the Me Too movement, have they destroyed the term sexist?
I think the word sexist lost its punch a long time ago. Again, probably from overuse. And perhaps a better example is misogynist.
Which Julia Gillard introduced to the
Right.
language. She denigrated one prime minister.
Hatred.
Exactly.
Hatred.
Exactly.
And now it just means male.
Yes, exactly.
So
exactly.
that word is gone. And I really think, and I have found this in relation to writing about Trump, and I'm no Trump fan. The most effective writing about Trump that's critical of him is very restrained, very understated. It's a much better way to go at that guy. Because after all, you're talking about President Hyperbole himself, right? Everything is always maxed out with him. So to be reserved and sophisticated and nuanced in response is much more effective. And in general, Democrats in the United States have gone the other direction and just gone, equally rabid. And it just looks like a bunch of kindergartners in a sandbox.
So let's talk about Trump. You predicted Trump wouldn't win, and you've regretted that. I predicted he would win, and I've never regretted it.
Okay, all right. Well, congratulations.
Thank you very much, Lionel. But your book, The Mandibles, was written about building a wall the Mexicans build a wall to stop the Americans coming into Mexico because their economy has collapsed. Mm-hmm. Now, you actually wrote all this before Trump, back in 2014. So, with Trump and what's changed, do you still have a bleak vision for America, or that vision that you put forward in the Book of Disaster? Do you still think that's a possibility?
I am still concerned about the United States economically. And in fact, I'm concerned about the whole world. The one thing that's unrealistic about the Mandibles, and I did this just to make my storytelling a little easier, is that the United States collapses economically and the rest of the world doesn't. And that's completely unrealistic. That would never happen. Yeah. But otherwise, everything in that book is horribly plausible. I was having a discussion with an economist at one of the events in Byron Bay, and he blithely said he expected for the Federal Reserve at some point simply to write off the American debt. Right. And didn't seem to think that there would be any consequences. Yeah. And I think that there would be consequences. In fact, that's the way the book begins, is that the president gets on television and renounces the national debt, that we're just defaulting, we're not paying it back. And I take a look at what's happening not just in the United States but worldwide, and not just sovereign debt but every other kind. And we are now worldwide in debt $247 trillion, which is such a large amount of money that I'm sure to most of your viewers, and myself included, is completely meaningless. But let's just say it's a lot.
It's a lot of money.
All right?
Yeah.
I do not believe that money is going to be paid back. And if it is not going to be paid back, it's not real. And that means the entire international financial system is propped on air. And that means we have the capacity for the kind of implosion that I think we've never, ever seen before. And I find that very frightening, on a selfish level. One of the reasons I wrote The Mandibles is it had to do with just scribbling on a piece of paper out of idle curiosity. I don't know what took me so long to make this calculation, which is, say, if I were to live as long as my paternal grandfather did, who lived to 96, what year would I die? 2053. And you'd think they'd be cheered up because, that's a long time from now. I was horrified. And it had to do with the fact that everything that worries me is supposed to be catastrophically at its worst in the middle of this century. And that's especially economically. It's when all the entitlement programs are going to completely cripple the Western world. And I'm a little worried that this debt situation is going to come due way before 2053.
There we go, Lionel Shriver.
On a cheerful note.
On a cheerful note, just very briefly, give us a very quick taste of what's in the exercising book coming up. What should we be looking for?
Well, it's very self-critical, and if not hypocritical, because I've been something of a fitness fanatic my whole life, but I find now that the rest of the world has caught up with me and is, if not even not as fanatical as I am, but maybe more so, that I find myself cynical about it. That is, to me, it's a mechanical business, and I notice that for a lot of people it's become a much more spiritual one.
Religion.
It's become a religion.
Another religion.
And I'm all for going out for a run, but I do not think that being able to go running is the whole purpose of life.
Makes you a better person.
Right. In fact, if I may give you a preview, in the very last chapter, someone makes the observation that apparently as machines are taking over the roles that people have hitherto done, people are becoming better machines.
Ooh, like it. Lionel Shriver, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders.
It's my pleasure.